Hi, my name is Katie Bartz, and I'd like to welcome you to another Janome Maker project. We're going to be working on a double layer applique from start to finish this time. I'm going to show you how to digitize the double layer applique, add some special stitches. We'll talk about some tips and tricks in the software and items to make your project very, very professional. And at the end, we'll show you how to stitch each one out and have wonderful success. So come along. As we begin creating our double applique in Artistic Digitizer, we want to make sure that our workspace is set up correctly. So I'm going to show you how to go through and set up a couple things, and I'm going to show you how I have set my particular workspace up for my workflow. The first thing we do when you open up the Artistic Digitizer is you will be at the welcome screen. If you've had other projects before, they'll be visible. I want to make sure I'm using a larger hoop. The reason being is my designs that we're going to be creating today are going to be between 4 to 8 inches, depending on what size you decide to choose. The tutorial that I'm going through today is more of a guideline and to inspire you, and we're going to go through step by step on how to create these fonts, and I want to make sure that you know that you can go through and play, have fun, and do whatever you want with your fonts to make them yours. So I'm going to choose the 140 by 200 hoop to begin with, and then I like to choose an appropriate background. If I'm working with light colors and bright colors, I like to have a darker colored background, and if I'm using with dark colors, I like to have a lighter background so it will show up better. So I kind of have a medium blue here. Let's go ahead and try that and see how that works. Then I'm going to go ahead and click on the Create New button, which will take me actually into the workspace. A couple things I want to point out here is I have these yellow lines here which show stitch area of your hoop. So when I create a design, I want to make sure I'm inside that stitch area. Most of you may have a blue or kind of purplish line here and it's hard to see. So I like to change it to something, again, brighter if my workspace is a little bit darker in the background. So to change that, we're going to go to the View menu, click on Customize UI Colors. UI stands for User Interface. And then in the center of that dialog box, you should see Hoop Limits. Go ahead and select the color that's there, and then choose whichever color you want at that point. Right, once that's selected, I'm going to go ahead and click off of it to get rid of the colors, and then I choose Save as Defaults. So the next time I create a new design, that will automatically come up. The second thing I'd like to talk about is the sequence window. So some of the samples that you're going to see today is this one. So if we have this open, you can see there is a Properties/Sequence window on the side. Some of you may not be able to see the whole thing because it's really small, and the property indicator on the left on what that particular item is it a fill? Is it an outline? Those little triggers will help you choose the right object when you're actually editing something. You have the capability in version 1.7 and in 2.0 to resize your sequence window. So if you have a lot of icons here, it makes it very nice to be able to really make them a lot smaller and see more sequence boxes on the side to actually manipulate your items. So I'm going to make mine a little bit larger so you can actually see it better on the screen, but also my goal is to be able to see the property that that particular sequence is. So this solid box means it's a fill, and again the outline here of the square means that that's an outline. So in this particular applique, we have the fill, which is the applique design, the outline, the applique fill, the outline, and then we have a third outline. A couple other samples just to show you kind of what we're going to do today. This is the actual font that we're going to be creating in today's tutorial, which will be fun. You can get really fancy and fun. I'll show you a couple little tricks on how to do this particular one. And then again, some basic ones just using some different fonts. Some of you may have graduations coming up later in 2026. So you can use some of these items on some of your graduation gifts. And again, just some unique fonts to be able to use in your projects. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. We selected new. So I have a new tab up here. And the first thing we're going to do is naturally we're going to have to choose a font to use as our applique. So I'm going to choose the lettering tab on the toolbar, and I'm going to make sure that I select, let's start with a true type font, because a lot of you have true type fonts. We'll go ahead and scroll down to the true type font, and we'll select Arial. And in the text box above that, we're going to go ahead and type the letter M. And you can see it's not centered. All right, most of you would go to your machine icon here and then choose center to hoop. But what that does is it physically picks up this hoop and moves it to the letter. Let me show you. Okay, so it picked up that hoop and moved it to the letter. And what I like to do is I like to select the font, and in the XY axis here on the property window, I like to type in a 0 and manually, center and vertically center it. So 0, 0, and then while I'm here, as I press the tab key, I can also set the size of my font. The font size that we're going to use today is we'll start out with 110 millimeters. Press the enter key, and that gives us a nice sized font. It fills up the hoop quite nicely. And what we're going to do is go over to the properties window, and we know this is going to be an applique, so I'm going to select the step button, select applique, and it's very quickly an applique. Now here's where the magic comes, and that's with the settings in the properties window. What we're going to do is scroll down until you see the fabric trim. Most of us trim our applique in the design as the embroidery is going. So your embroidery will go through, it will have a placement stitch, then it will have you place the fabric down on the hoop, and then it will stitch a tack down stitch, and then you remove the hoop from the machine, and then you'll cut very closely to the stitches around whatever you're appliquing, then put your hoop back on the machine, and then finally you will have a finishing stitch, which is usually either an E-stitch, blanket stitch, a satin stitch, or other decorative stitch. Because we're going to be using an electronic cutter or a pre-cut template in this tutorial, we want to go ahead and select pre-cut and glue, because we're going to go ahead and use a fusible web on the back of our fabric so that the alphabet or the applique clings to whatever project we're doing and it doesn't separate during the wash, etc. So we're going to pre-cut and glue. We're going to cut using our electronic cutter, or we're going to cut it out manually using a template, and I will show you how to set that up. Then finally we want to go ahead and choose fixed satin. So that's all the settings we have here for the actual applique. Okay, so you could actually take this and stitch it out just absolutely beautifully. But we want to go ahead and tweak that just a little bit more. So we're going to go ahead and select that object again. And this time we're going to make some changes in our settings under the constraints and outline menus. This double applique is not going to have to worry about like bulk in it, because we're going to actually lay our fabric right on top of each other. So if you're going to be using heat transfer vinyl or something, then you want to have your overlaps removed. In this case, we want the letters to be right on top of each other when they're stitching. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I'm going to never remove my overlaps. We're going to set the outline stitch to 3.0, which is great for this is going to be the inner applique, so that's going to be good. We're going to change our offset. The offset in your design is where this stitch, for example, this satin stitch lays in relation to this placement stitch, or this cut line that is going to be used for the electronic cutter. In an applique, you can see here half the stitches, satin stitch, is on the fabric and half the stitch is off the fabric. What we want to do ideally is have 2/3 of the stitch be on the applique fabric and approximately 1/3 be off the fabric when we are pre-cutting or we are using a template to pre-cut our applique. So to change that setting, we have to decrease the offset. So if you take a look here, I'll go over to the offset, and I'm going to use the wheel on my mouse and scroll that towards me, and you can see, if you keep an eye on the screen here, as I roll that scroll wheel towards me, that line becomes less on the outside and it places more of the stitch on the fabric. So this is a negative 0.5 millimeters. That looks good. So I have about 2/3 on the fabric and I have about 1/3 off the fabric. And that 1/3 off the fabric is going to take up for the height of your fabric as well as some of the stitch wrap during the applique. That will do a couple things. It will actually make your applique less puckery because it's not pulling the fabric from outside here because you have so much fabric out here. It's actually stabilized more by the applique lettering. So your appliques will become a lot more smoother, and it will actually be a lot stronger because you're not just hanging by a thread. When you're appliquing, if you manually trim that stitching away, and the third thing is you're not going to have a lot of flopping of this thread. So if you were going to create, for example, a patch, you want to make sure that that final stitching around the patch is mostly on the applique because you don't want to have a lot of flimsy stitches hanging over the edge. So if I had this, again, hanging over the edge, we don't want this stitching right here loose on the patch. We want it nice and taut. So the way to get that is to actually change the offset so that it is closer to the edge of the fabric. Now this can only be accomplished when you're using an electronic cutter, or if you manually, very carefully trim your applique using the fusible web that we'll be talking about. Next, we're going to change the density. Now you don't have to change the density. By default, 0.4 is, beautiful. I just think it might be a little too thick for what I like to do. So I'm going to go ahead and change that to a 0.45. To decrease that a little bit, the stitches are separated a little bit, and then stitches can actually relax a little bit as they're pulled and stitched down, and they won't be so thick. This is also wonderful if you use a metallic thread, because metallic threads are a little bit thicker. You want to go ahead and create a little space between the threads so that they can lay down a little bit flatter and be less bulky and not break. Because I've decreased the density, I can change the underlay to be a zigzag under there. So some of the stitching that I took away with the density will come back with the underlay because of the zigzag. Now I use the zigzag plus. The plus is really important here because the plus adds this stitch line on both sides of the stitch line, and that will actually create a wall of stitches for your satin stitch to stitch against, which creates a beautiful, straight, clean, smooth border as you're stitching. So as it hits that stitch line, it's going to pull against that stitch, and it's not going to have jagged and misshapen looks in your applique. It will actually create a more professional looking applique. Alright, so once that's done, that's all the settings we have to worry about for our inner part of our applique. The next thing we have to do is create our second applique, which is going to go to the outside and be a little bit larger. And you do that simply by right-clicking on the applique, and we're going to use our Auto Border feature. Auto Border will pull up a dialog box that will ask you some questions. So where do you want to position this new border? Well, I want to go to the outside. And what's the distance? Well, I'd like to go, let's say, I've got quite a bit of space here between my letters. My spacing, there's no fancy curly cues and anything that will get twisted up. So if I go 8 millimeters, well, you know, all we can do is try. If it doesn't work, we can undo that step and redo it. So there's no harm in experimenting here. And then we're going to go ahead and make sure satin serial is selected. And I would like my outer satin stitch to be 4 millimeters in width. Once I click OK, you can see it places a duplicate of that particular item around the outside of the object. Now the next step is crucial. What you want to do is make sure you assign a new color to that outer object so you have capability to set the properties of that outer object later. If it's the same color, you can do it. It's just a lot harder. Okay, you have to do a little bit more digging to get the right design. So here we're going to go ahead and go down to the color palette, and there's a little plus sign above the bucket. So I want to fill that particular applique with a color. So if I hit the plus sign, I can choose a color, and you'll notice here I am using RGB. As a designer and artist, I don't know what color palette thread that I'm going to be using at any given time. So I start creating my designs with RGB, and as I'm ready to stitch them out, I will actually change the thread color and thread palette at that time, so I can go to swatches and choose specific colors. So later, if I wanted to, I know I was going to use a Janome thread palette, I could go to swatches and choose the particular colors from that particular palette. But because I'm using RGB, the swatches is going to be empty. Okay, so it's more for artistic capability for me and no other function. So I'll go ahead and choose that pink. I will click off of the color palette, and it will fill that design with the color I've selected. And then I'm going to go ahead and create an outline for that, because the outline here is blank. Alright, so if I click up here, it will take that pink from below and then create the outline for that particular font. If I look in the properties window, now it says it's a step fill design. It's not an applique. So I need to make this an applique. And very quickly, you simply select that, click on applique, and now it's an applique design. Again, fabric trim, I want to do this pre-cut and glue, and it already has a satin outline, so I don't need to create a fixed satin. I want to remove the overlaps, because you can see here this M is sitting inside of here, and it's removing that color from that M. So I'm going to say never. And then we'll come back in just a moment and modify the settings for this outline. When I design, I like to have each of my sequences separated. So if we take a look in the sequence box, we see that the outline and fill is combined here, and the outline and fill is combined here. I like to have my steps separate so I can click on the step that I want specifically and make the changes to that object. So what I'm going to do is, if you press Control A, it will select both objects on the screen. I'm going to go up here and select Auto Sequence and change that to Manual. And when that changes to Manual, it will go ahead and separate the sequence. Now they may not be in the proper order, but we can change that now that it's in manual mode. When it's in auto mode, you can't change the steps inside of your applique or embroidery design. So when I'm stitching this design out, the first layer that I want to stitch out is this applique pink. Then I want it to stitch the actual outline itself, the satin outline. Then I want it to stitch the M applique and then the outline. And you can see now, once I have it in order, I have the remove overlaps set to never. This corrected itself, and now it's not removing the overlaps. All right, so let's go back to the settings for our outline for our satin stitch here, because we didn't change the settings here. We take a look at the satin serial, which is correct. In my auto border settings earlier, I set it to 4.0, so I brought it over here at 4.0. I still need to change my offset, because again we're going to use the electronic cutter or use a template. I want the edges of my satin stitch not to be hanging over onto my fabric and pulling the fabric. I want most of the fabric, at least 2/3 of the satin stitch, to be on the fabric to give it more stability and a smoother applique. And again, you're going to have the precision with an electronic cutter or cutting it manually prior to laying it down on your embroidery design. You'll have a lot more accuracy. You can actually not have to worry about such a large overhang with trimming it manually, because we know when we trim it manually, we never get perfect, we never get close enough, and sometimes you have the little fringy edges sticking out. All right, the techniques that I'll show you later with using a template or the electronic cutter totally remove that option off the table, and your appliques are a lot cleaner. So we're going to go ahead and again reduce the offset, and you can see as I'm moving the offset, it's changing the position so that the fabric holds more of the satin stitches and they're not hanging over the edge as much. So it's just going to barely cover the edge of that fabric. I am going to go ahead and set my offset to, let's do a negative 0.9. And I'm confident with this because, again, I'm using electronic cutter and I will have that accuracy. The density, I'm going to change the same thing I did before. I'm going to change that to a 0.45 to relax and lighten the density a little bit, but I'm going to put some stitches back with an underlay. And the reason I'm doing that is I want to use the zigzag, but I want this wall that's going to be going around the edge of the satin stitch to give me nice, clean, crisp applique edges. All right, so your design now is almost complete. If I hold the Control key down on my keyboard, you can see that I can zoom in and zoom out on my keyboard and on the screen very quickly. Using the Alt key, I can scroll or pan left and right using the scroll button on my mouse. So those two particular functions I use all the time. So Control and scroll and Alt and scroll allow me the flexibility to move around my screen very, very quickly. The last step in creating this gorgeous applique is to create that stitch that goes down the center of either the internal or external applique piece. I'm going to go ahead and put those stitches down the center, the aqua piece of applique. So I have four steps here. I need one more step. And if I select applique, you can see that this pink line again is going to be the cut line, and that's actually where the placement line is. And with version 2 of Artistic Digitizer, I can actually turn off that particular layer by hiding that selection. So I went to the satin stitch because I want to hide the satin stitch so I can see what's below it. I click on that. I can right click on it either in the sequence bar or on the applique itself, and I can select hide the item, and it will temporarily hide that satin stitch. And if I zoom in here, you can see the placement line and how close that is to that fabric, and that's exactly how it's going to stitch out when you place it on your fabric in your actual project. So that's the cut line as well as the placement line. To bring that particular satin stitch back, you just simply either click on the satin stitch, or you could have right-clicked on the satin stitch and select Show again to turn that back on. So what we want to do is we want to create another auto border that goes right around where this placement stitch is. So once that item is selected, now I don't want to select the satin stitch because the satin stitch, you know, goes all over the place. I want to create my auto border from the applique piece because this is the precision layer. This is the layer that has the placement as well as, you know, the cut line. So this is the precision layer. I'm going to go ahead and right click on that object, select auto border. This time doesn't matter if I choose inside or outside because the distance that I want to select is 0. And I want to create a running stitch and click OK. Once I've done that step, the very next step is I need to make sure to set a new color for that stitch that's down the center of that satin stitch. So if I look over here at the color swatch panel, you can see there is a box around the blue. So currently it's set to blue. You can reset it to blue later if you want it to be blue on blue stitching, which is absolutely gorgeous. But I'd like to have a white stitch going down there. So I want to make sure and add an outline color, and it's going to apply that outline color to whatever I have selected on the screen. So if I select the center of this circle, right, it will place it to white. I can click off of it, and a new object has been created to my sequence window. If I didn't change the color, it would have combined it with one of these, and then you have to separate them. That's the tricky part, and hopefully we can get to that at a later tutorial down the road. But for the meantime, if you remember to immediately change the color, you won't have any problems. And if you mess up, you just press Ctrl-Z and do it again and choose your color. Now we can set the properties for this white stitching. If I click off of my design and I zoom in using the Control and Scroll button, you can see that I'm almost centered down the middle of that satin stitch line, but I'm not. So I'm going to select that M and that stitching, and you know it's the outline stitch because in the sequence bar it gives you the symbol that it's an outline. I need to change the offset, and again earlier it was set to a -0.5, so let me zoom in here again, and then I'm going to scroll my mouse button while I'm in here, and you have incremental settings that you can set, so you don't have to manually type it in. You can just roll your scroll button on your mouse, and that looks like it's pretty well centered here. Then I like to change the length. I like to have a tiny beaded look, so I like to go ahead down to a 2.2. And then, am I going to use a single, double, or triple stitch? Well, what's unique to this is you can actually select the stitch from the menu here, and right now it's set to double. And I know it's set to double because it says double in here. But if I go up to the stitch width and I use my scroll to decrease that setting again, you'll see that when I'm at 0.4, it's set to none. So I like to manually set my double and triple. If it goes to a 0.5, it automatically switches to a double. And if I go to 0.9, it automatically changes to a triple stitch. All right, that's just part of my computer background. I like that precision. There's nothing wrong with going in and choosing triple from this menu option. Okay, but I find that if I can change this setting just a little bit, sometimes the stitching is a little bit wider when I'm working with this, and I like to see that stitch a little bit more. I will actually put it to a 0.9 or larger, and it will actually stitch a little bit thicker triple stitch than the regular one if it was at a 0.4 and did a triple stitch, if that makes any sense. All right, this line satin stitch right here is a 3.0, and I find that using a double stitch is actually just quite beautiful on this, and it doesn't overpower the stitching of that satin outer border at all. It just blends in very, very nicely. All right, so I'll click off my design and scroll out using my control key and the wheel on my mouse, and you've completed your first double applique design. So that wasn't hard. It was really quite straightforward and very simple. You just have to follow the steps. Each one of these particular applique designs will have 5 sequence steps. So for example, if I go to this other sample, the P up here, you can see there's 5 steps to that one. If I go to this Lacy double applique, there's 5 steps to that one. So all of these designs are the same. They're just using different fonts. Now, one final thing I'd like to go over with you before I talk about how to export the design to a template and then take you out to the studio to show you how to use the electronic cutter. If I go to this P here, one more up here, there's one that actually had a little bit of an issue. Let me look here. This one here. Some of your fonts, especially if they're a true type font, and even some of the XPG fonts that are inside of Artistic Digitizer, may have more nodes in the actual letters than are needed. So if I click on the Edit Nodes button here, let me choose Outline. Let me choose the Satin Outline, and I choose Edit Nodes. If I scroll in to this corner, one of the things Artistic Digitizer is known for is creating absolutely beautiful mitered stitched corners. But sometimes it will be modified because it has too many stitch points or nodes to look to make that corner. So this corner is not as mitered as maybe I personally would like it. The Edit Nodes feature is what you're going to go into to make this corner even nicer. And let's talk about this for a second. So we have here a green circle. That's going to be your smooth node setting. This is a cusp node, and this is a cusp node. Red squares are cusp nodes. And what does that mean? Well, smooth node basically means it's going to be taking a gentle curve. So whenever you see a smooth node, it's kind of more curve friendly. A cusp node basically means it's a sharp corner. It's a sharp corner node, and you have the power to adjust how sharp you want it to be. And when you have several of these nodes together, they kind of fight each other. So I know for sure that I want this particular corner, let me just zoom that up here a little bit, I want this particular corner to be a nice crisp corner. So I don't need this smooth node in this particular corner. So I can select it and delete it. And I don't need this extra node here at this point, so I'm going to select that and delete it. But now you say, boy, Katie, you've really made a mess. Now look at that. Well, I can change that, because usually when you make a box or a square is 4 nodes, okay, with straight lines. So what this is, it's a node, but it doesn't have a straight vertical line coming off of it. How do I know that? Well, if I scroll in on this and I click on this node and just gently move it just ever so slightly, you will see these handles appear. So this handle is letting me know that this particular node is a sharp corner. All right, it's just a wider corner, but I want it to be a nice 90-degree corner. So I can take this handle and I can drag it so it's perpendicular and right on top of that particular cut line. And when I did that, look how nice and sharp that corner is. All right, this one's pretty close itself, so I can take it, I can adjust it wherever I want it, but if that blue line lands up right on top of the pink, I know it's going to be a perfectly square corner. And if we take a look, we've got boom, boom, boom. Nice square corners. There's no other extra nodes to steer any of the stitches in the wrong direction. So we're doing good. So if I scroll out here, take a look here and you'll say, oh my goodness, we have some more nodes over in this section. Let's take care of this. So I don't want any roundness in this particular corner. You can kind of see it's a little round. I would like it a little sharper. So I'm going to go ahead, I don't need that node. I want, just like a box, I want nice 4 points in my corners. And I don't need this one. And by removing those 2 nodes, that, straightened it out quite a bit. But if I look at this and zoom out a little bit, it has a slight curve to it. You can see up here I also have some nodes that are extra. Okay, I've got 2 nodes together right here, and I have one here. So I don't need this one. So I'm going to delete that one, and I'm going to take the one on the far left, select that, press delete. Boy, that really cleaned up that corner really good. But if I zoom out, you might see that curve just a little bit more here. So what I'm going to do is I need to make those handles visible. And the only way to make them visible is to click on a node and just kind of give it a little shake. Just shake it up a little bit. You can put it back in the same spot it was. Okay? And I can then take these handles and place this one vertically or horizontal with that. Go down here, you can see how this handle is kind of scooch it out. So I'm going to go ahead and take that handle. Oops, I have to go back up here and get this node again. Let me zoom out and scroll down. Grab that handle, and you can see that I can adjust that just like a pendulum, and I'm going to adjust that so it's right on top of that pink line. Okay, and finally you can see this particular handle is coming off here, kind of swooping off to the right, so let's adjust that one. If I take this, select this handle, you can see my mouse turns into 4 arrows, so that I can actually move that. And I can move it way out here. You can see me moving it, but as long as it's perfectly vertical to this particular corner, you will have a nice, I'm going to go ahead and turn my selection off here. You will have nice mitered corners on your letters when you're actually stitching them out. So don't be afraid, and I promise you, you will have to adjust some nodes. You'll have to move or delete some extra nodes that aren't needed. If you accidentally delete one that you didn't want to delete, you just press Control and Z on your keyboard, or Command Z. I believe on a Mac, I'm not sure what that is, if you have a Control key. I don't use a Mac, so I apologize. So hopefully you can interpret what I'm saying and apply it to your particular keyboard. But you can see how much nicer and cleaner this particular design is than what it was. So there you go. You've created your first double applique. And what we're going to do in the next short little lesson here in this tutorial is show you how to save the design so that you can use it as a template and print it out on paper so that you can transfer it to your fusible webbing and pre-cut your applique pieces.
Now the only difference you have to make your applique design into a lacy looking design is change this outer satin stitch. So if I select that outer satin stitch, you can see it says satin serial, but what I really want is a running stitch. And with that running stitch selected, I can come into my stitch selections and use any of these decorative stitches. So I find that number 36 is a good one. It gives me a nice lacy look. And if I scroll in, you can see that that is centered nice along the line. It's covering some of the fabric from the applique, and it's hanging over a little bit. You can nudge your offset a little bit, but if I do that, I might not be able to cover up the actual applique edge of the fabric. You know what? And I can actually come in maybe just a little bit, just so you can see that it might be just a little bit nicer. Let me zoom in on this. If I come in just a couple clicks here, let's come in point -3, -0.3. So that'll come in here and it looks like it's going to actually cover the edge of that applique fabric a little bit better. So I really don't like that particular stitch. You can choose something else. If you want, you can even go ahead and change the outside color of that stitch. So if I select that color and select that object from the sequence, I can come over here to the outline color palette and click on the plus key, and I can choose a different color. Let's choose white. It doesn't really show up that good, so let me go ahead and right click on that color palette, white, choose edit color, and let's just choose something just a little bit different. There's a light aqua. That's kind of pretty. Right? And that's even changed the stitch altogether. So you can see how just simple and easy this is to change. Let's say I want more of a star pattern. I think 238 is a nice, or 286 maybe. Here it is, 286. A nice little star pattern. Okay, so here now the underside of that fabric is sticking out, so maybe I need to reduce my offset a little bit. And that will cover it up. And that's all there is to making a really pretty lacy applique design. So I wanted to make sure and throw that in as a bonus. So enjoy, have fun.
Now that we have our font created, we're going to go ahead and go through the steps to create, number one, either the cut file and or a template so that you can manually cut your applique out of fabric before you place it on your project. This is the M font that we created earlier. We need to make sure that it knows that a cut file has to be created. So if we go up to the Techniques button, we need to make sure and turn on the cut feature that's available. If I don't, when I go to the File menu, go to Export, this option to cutters will not be available. Okay, so let me go in and turn that technique off. And if I come back up here to File, Export, the to cutters option is not available. So that's my first clue that I need to have that technique turned on. So again, we go to Techniques, go to Cut, click OK, and now when I go to File, Export, to cutters is available, and when I select to cutters, if you have your Artistic Edge cutter connected to your computer, you can select that cutter and then export to the machine and cut out your project. If you do not have a cutter and you want to create a template to cut, you want to go ahead and select the DXF option. DXF is a plotter, kind of an AutoCAD file, and it's a highly engineered file. It's very accurate. And if you select that and select Export, this particular design will be exported. Now it's hard to see the pink and the blue. So what I would like to encourage you to do is just temporarily change the colors of your applique layers in your sequence to darker colors so that they will print dark on your cardstock, and I would recommend using cardstock because you can trace around that very easily instead of printer paper. You can see the measurements here, and we're going to compare that to what the measurement of the design is, as well as change the colors of our design just temporarily for printing purposes. So let me cancel. So what I need to do is go over to the sequence window and just select the applique portion, the part that's going to be cut. Now when I go to File, Export to Cutters, DXF, Export, now we'll get a more accurate setting. So it's 12.59 centimeters, which is the same as 126 millimeters. So 12.59 is 125.9 millimeters, and it's 0.01 millimeters short, which is, really, 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 really tiny. So it's basically the same thing. And then the height of the design here is 13.2 centimeters, and here we have 13.3 centimeters or 131 millimeters. So we just move that decimal place 1 point to get this setting. So this cutting file, or the file that it's going to print to PDF, is going to be so accurate that when you lay it on your applique, it'll lay right on the placement lines, or just inside of it barely, when you are creating your project. It's one of the reasons I love applique using electronic cutter or templates, and kind of bypass the manual cutting with the scissors. So we want to go ahead and change the pink and the aqua to a darker color so it shows up darker on our printer. So I'm going to go ahead and select my pink applique layer because that's the cutting layer. And here it is down here. It's selected. And I'm going to edit the color. And I can just bring this down so that's darker. I'm going to go ahead and select the applique layer here. and it's changing both of them because they're both the same color. If you wanted to go ahead and make it a different color, let me show you how to do it on this one. So if I really wanted to make this one maybe a red so it shows up good, select that applique design, and it's put a box around the fill color, but you can actually change it to a different color by clicking the plus sign by the bucket. And we'll go ahead and change that to a dark red so you can see it. And when I click off of this, you can see that it just changed that particular applique design piece. It didn't change the outline at all. So you have those options. Either one is going to be fine, because when it prints the design, it's just going to print the cut line. It's not going to print the satin stitch. So now if I go to File, select Export, go to Cutters, select the DXF format, I select Export, and you can see here there's a red line, there is a black line, but when I print it, let me choose Print, what I can do is come over here to the settings screen on the right hand side and just select Design Only, so it will turn off all this information and the dark fabric and everything. I can just want to select Design Only, and here you have the template. When you print this out at actual print size, 100%, it will be the size of the applique design that you're going to be using. And all you need to do is take your cardstock and take 2 sheets of cardstock and print this 2 times on 2 sheets. Then carefully, very carefully, cut out the M or whichever font letter that you're working with a small scissors, and get very accurate. And if you can, go ahead and cut just to the inside of the print line, to the inside of that cut line. Then you have your templates, and you'll be able to take those to your project and then go ahead and trace them to the back of your fusible web. You want to make sure before you cut anything out, though, that you put an X on the front of this so that you know which side is the front of your template and which side is the back, so that you get your letter in the correct position. This one's a little bit different because it looks the same, but if you had a letter P or something, it would definitely be easier. You could see, what side was face up because it's going to be backwards. And then when you put the fabric down onto your project, it will be right side up and in the correct direction. But something that's similar like this, or a letter I or something, you want to put some kind of mark on here so you know what side is the front and the back. All right, I think we've completed our process on how to create a double layer monogram applique. I'm just Control-Zing to get back to my beginning here. So the next step in this particular process is to meet me at the sewing machine and at the electronic cutting machine and see how this process all comes together. Once you do the heavy lifting up here in the front, the back end is just fun, and it goes together so quickly that you just get motivated, inspired to do more. So please comment on this particular project, share it with your friends, subscribe to the Janome Maker channel, and follow everybody that uses Artistic Digitizer and the Janome machines so that you can continue to get wonderful free tutorials and get educated. Okay, once you've printed your pattern, your templates on cardstock, I'm using cardstock here, and again, you want to make sure that you are printing 2 copies because you want to be able to cut out the inside and the outside of that applique. I've started cutting these out, and as you can see, I've cut very, very close to the lines, and if we take a look really close here, you will see that I have a little bit of red on this particular mark right here, and I have a little bit of red right here. It might show up better if I put piece of paper under it. 1 second. This one is cutting out the inside of the template, and one thing I wanted to point out and show you in this particular cutout, again, we're cutting very, very close, but you actually, when you're cutting, you actually want to extend your cut line just a little bit, maybe a 64th of an inch, 32nd of an inch. When you come to a point, you snip beyond that point, because that allows you then to come back this other direction and have a little bit more accuracy on that corner, and it will be a lot sharper. So I'll be able to come in here with my scissors and again snip just beyond that, and I will end up with a very nice sharp corner. So when I draw in here, it's going to be very, very accurate. And again, I'm using a very small, sharp scissors here. You could also use a small rotary cutter and a ruler to get you through the straight edges of your template. Make sure that you use a rotary cutter that you can use for paper. So I save my old blades and use them for paper. Then you're going to get your fusible web. The two that I like to use are Perfect Applique from Sulky, or this is Heat and Bond Light as a sample. One side of it is glue. Okay, there's a kind of a layer of glue on the back, and then the other side is strictly paper. What you're going to do is take your fabric, and you're going to go ahead and apply or heat fuse that particular sheet to the back of the piece of fabric that you're using. And then, because we are using a manual method here, we're going to go ahead and remember we have to reverse or mirror image our item on the back. So if you just print from the software and print it direct, the letter P would show, like this. Right? Cut it out. But when you put it on the back, if you do not have the capability to mirror image your particular project as you're printing it, and you'll have that in the settings, and inside the Artistic Digitizing software, when you say print, it goes directly to the printer that you select. It will not let you set up your specific settings. So it will print it directly face up, but when you put it onto the back and you fuse your fusible web to the back of your fabric, you want to make sure and trace your particular letter to the back of the fusible web on the paper side, again in mirror image or reverse mode. All right, same thing with the large letter. I've left a little space here so I can show you how to do that particular letter. So if I were going to go ahead and trace this, I'm going to take a very sharp pen. If I come in here and I start drawing, because I'm using cardstock, it's going to give me a nice rigid edge to trace against. And if you miss a corner, that's not a problem. Okay, just trace around it very close, like that. And you can see I really kind of messed it up here. Well, that's, again, not a problem, because when we cut this out, we're going to cut to the inside smooth edge of that particular letter. So here, in this particular part of the letter, I'm going to come around with my scissors and cut all the ink off, because that is the external part of this letter. I want the letter, when it's finished, to be the size of this particular template. And if I draw on that template, all right, draw around it, when I pull it away, that left edge or inside edge of that letter is going to be exactly what I need to stitch the project down on my machine. So once you get both those particular pieces reversed on the back, traced, cut out carefully, we're going to go ahead and show you how to stitch that down on your machine. And then we're going to show you how to cut the M out on the artistic edge as well as stitch that down. So you can see that both methods can be very accurate, again, and it will be dependent upon you how careful that you cut. To send this design to the electronic edge cutter, we want to again make sure that we have the to cut option or the cut option set under techniques, because that will allow our cutter to be available when we go to File, Export to Cutters. We have our artistic edge right here. When I say connect, your machine will move just a little bit, get into position, and we're going to tell it which template we want to actually send it to the machine. So they're both selected right now because they're both highlighted blue. I'm going to unhighlight that one. The first color, the first template it wants to stitch is the one that is the bottom in the design. So that's going to be the largest piece. But I need to set my fabric onto my cutter. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure we have the low tack adhesive mat available, and we're going to go ahead and peel off the backing for our heat away, or heat and bond. And I'm going to go ahead and place this in the upper left hand corner. And I'll show you why I'm going to do that in a minute. And then I will also just gently smooth out that fabric on here so it will lay nice and flat. I'm going to lay this onto my machine, and there is a little red dot, little red laser that will show here, and you're going to slide your fabric in until that dot is on your fabric, and then you simply secure the mat by lifting those levers on the side up. Now if we go back to the computer, the reason I put my fabric in the upper left hand corner is because this is the origin where the laser dot is, okay? This is the origin. I can actually change my origin of where I want that laser to be, as well as where I want it to start cutting. So if I click over here, this circle will come over here, and I will be able to start cutting from this position to the left. Most people, I'm guessing, go ahead and have the dot in the upper left hand corner. It makes sense logically. So all I need to do is press the cut button, and just like that, the send is complete. You do have the capability to slow the speed down a little bit, so maybe on the next design I'll go ahead and do that to show you how that works. So simply go ahead and lower these levers, pull your mat out, and you will see that your M is cut nice and clean. Now if you don't have tools, it's nice to have some tools to help you release this from the fabric so things don't get stretched out of shape. This is a low tack mat, so it really doesn't take much, but I do have a tool here, a spatula, that will allow me to lift the corner of these designs up so that I don't have difficulty later when I try to stitch them down by distortion. So let's try this next one, the inner M. Again, I'm going to peel that backing off. I'm going to go ahead and lay my fabric down. Use my scraper to position that into place and smooth it out. I'm going to go ahead and place that in the machine as soon as I line it up here in the software. So right now I've got the first one done. I'm going to unselect that and I'm going to select the second design. And when I do that, I'm going to go ahead and place this into my fabric, my mat, and secure it into position. If you like, you have the capability to trace the design. It's a little high, so what I can do is manipulate this mat. If I hold the Shift key down on my keyboard and I click this up arrow button right here, it will raise the fabric into my edge cutter a little bit, and then I can retrace again to make sure that that cutter is going to cover that whole area that I need for that M. That looks great. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and slow my speed down a little bit. I'm going to take it down to 15 instead of 25, and I'm going to tell it to cut. And it's done. I say okay. I can close this. I release these levers and pull this out, and I can tear off the fabric, and I have a very nice neat internal M, and this one's a lot narrower, so I do want to make sure that I use the spatula to release that letter. Okay, beautiful. I tell you, I couldn't get that cut any nicer if I tried. But that's how the letter is going to look when we get that stitched down. So I will meet you at the sewing machine, and we will go ahead and stitch this to some fabric and see how well that lines up. All right, my machine is set up, it's threaded. I have the letter P loaded on my machine, and we're ready to start appliquing. I have my main fabric laid down that I'm going to actually place the applique on, and this will probably go on a pouch or something later on, so that's why it's so small. But the first layer we're going to stitch is going to be this floral layer. The first thing it has to do is create the placement stitch. And again, in the software, we used the place, embroider, and glue feature. We didn't use the cut during the applique process because we want to have nice, clear, clean cuts when we're working with this type of applique. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, we stitched the outline stitch or the placement stitch, and it's allowing me to go ahead and take it off the hoop. It is trimmed. I'm going to go ahead. I know it's probably very hard to see here because this is going to be an actual project, so I used real thread, but you can kind of hopefully see the outline of the P, where I'm going to actually go to my ironing board right now, and I'm going to, because this is glued on the back, I'm going to go ahead and peel that backing off. And this is the one that we actually cut manually. So having the template, that allows us to have a very nice clean finish, and it will fit exactly in that area where the stitches are. So I'm going to take this over to my ironing board. I have a very small iron, and I will just really touch this to hold it in place and tack it down really good so that the stitches can go on there after the fact. So I'll be right back. So I have this glued down now with the heat and bond, and we'll take it back to the sewing machine and stitch that down. Okay, place that back on the machine, and what it's going to do right now is going to stitch the underlay stitch for the satin stitch that's going to go around. And we use that double line with a zigzag, so that will tack down the edges as well as create a nice foundation for the satin stitch to go on. Okay, I'm going to take this off and show you how beautiful that is. That stitching is right next to the edge of the fabric, and there are no little pokies sticking out of the edges like you would if you were manually cutting this with during the embroidery. So pre-cutting it ahead of time really makes a wonderful difference. All right, now we're going to go ahead and prepare it so it places the placement stitch so that we can actually place the inner P on our project. So I'll get my hoop back on. And I'm going to change my thread color. Okay, we're ready to go. Hopefully you can see here a little bit of a tack down stitch right here and the tack down stitch along the edge of the inner side. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the ironing board with my mini iron and just tack that down so the heat will hold it in place so that it can be stitched. All right, my thread is the right color, and I'll go ahead and start. And then the last color is going to be the double stitch or triple stitch, whatever you decided. Now, this stitch, the gold stitch around here, is very narrow. You wouldn't be able to get that narrow of a stitch if you would have trimmed it during the embroidery, because you really would have had a lot of little pokies sticking out, little threads sticking out. So let's take a look at stitching the next color. All right, we are ready to stitch that double stitch that's going around here. So let me start the machine. It looks like we put a triple stitch on this one. So let's just take a look while that stitches out. What we'll do next is go ahead and stitch out the M that we cut with the electronic cutter and see what kind of results we get with that. I'm ready to start stitching this applique, and we're going to have the letter M. Let me set the small piece aside, and it's going to go ahead and stitch out the placement stitch for the large letter M first, and this is the one we did with the electronic cutter. So we did during the design phase of this, remember we used the embroider and then the glue so that we don't have to stop and trim the design manually using the cutter. So we'll be able to go to the machine or the ironing board later and glue that down after this placement stitch is done. So I always like to kind of advance it one stitch before it stitches so it moves from the center to the actual design. And then I will press start. It stops so that I can pull up my bobbin thread. I like the back of my embroidery to look just as nice as the front, so that's why we do that. Then I will stop and trim the threads. And there's a little more contrast in the thread with this particular design, so you should be able to see the placement stitch a lot better. Okay, the placement stitch is done. I will go ahead and take it to the iron and tack down and glue down fabric that's going to be on top for the applique, so for the first layer. Okay, here is the design, and you can see how nice they just fit right here in the placement stitch. I mean, you can't get any closer than that. That's just, it's wonderful. And then we allowed that couple millimeters to go over the edge of the fabric so there won't be any pokies. All right, I'm anxious to stitch this out. Okay, I'll put this hoop back on the machine exactly where the machine had stopped. And it's going to go ahead and do the tack, not the tack down, but it's kind of a tack down. It's the underlay for the satin stitch. And that has the zigzag, which will catch the edge, and it also has the 2 rows of straight stitching to create that wall, so there's a beautiful straight satin stitch when this is absolutely done. So let me get started. I'll pull up my bobbin thread. Trim my tails. Okay, now we're ready to go ahead and do the second applique. So I'll change my thread color. Okay, we're ready to start the placement stitch for the second applique. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead to the ironing board and I'm going to go ahead and place that on top of that stitching. Here it is glued to the placement line, and you can see it just fits just beautifully. Okay, I have the color in there that I want for the satin stitch. So it's going to do that underlay, the zigzag with the double lines, and then it's going to do the satin stitch. Let's have fun. Just trimming my threads. Now we're ready for the beautiful stitching line down the satin stitch. So I'll change my thread color and be right back. Okay, it's done. It's beautiful. You can kind of get a close-up there. Let's go up and take it to the other camera and show you a little bit closer. Look how nice that is. No pokies, and again the columns, the straight satin stitch along the edge is really straight because of that wall of stitches that we've created during the design process. Beautiful.